Welcome to UberCube, the podcast where we discuss all things cube, but with refreshments. This is your host, Anthony Adams, aka UberBear, and I'm joined by a special guest this evening.
Christian Anderson.
Yeah, so Christian is back this evening because we're going to discuss part 2 of the Dumpster Fire Project, where Christian was the 8th curator involved in that project. And we're going to talk about what he has learned, what was the reason for his additions, what was his process, right? But before we go any further, we're going to do the thing that we always do here at UberCube, and we're going to enjoy our libations of the show. Christian.
I am having an Appalachian Mountain Brewery Long Leaf IPA.
And I am also having an AMB, which is an Appalachian Mountain Brewery out of North Carolina. The Low and Hazy IPA. It's good stuff, man. It's local, tried and true. All right, so let's get over to the topic. For those that didn't get a chance to listen to episode 1, I'm going to give a brief synopsis. The project scope: 10 curators, 1 cube. Rule sets were: it has to be bulk rares or mythic, not exceeding $2, and must be functional. Each of the 10, me being the first curator in the last episode, I entered in approximately 72 cards as a foundation, leaving behind a couple of intentional signposts and maybe just giving a baseline of what the other players should expect. That point moving forward, it was on a first come, first served basis where they entered in as, it was kind of funny. It was almost fervorous how quickly people started entering in and sending me text messages trying to get in. And once they entered in their batch, and whether that was the 45 as we had recommended, or in Christian's case, I believe it was 26, maybe actually more. We'll talk about that. I froze them. I said, please don't try to give me more. We're going to move over to the next curator and they're going to batch up. And all we're doing is, if you can picture the amplitude meter on an equalizer going up and down, that's how this cube was being built. I'm getting these subsets, these batches, and just data entering them into Cube Cobra. And watching this form, me being the admin or the administrator managing it, it was just a bulk entry at that point. Basic baseline build up as each archetype didn't care about it. Each subset of whether or not it was controlled, mid-range, aggro, didn't care. Because this was a learning opportunity and a social experiment bottled up into one. And it was interesting for me to see the card entries as they're getting entered. I could very much see people who are veteran cube curators, and I could see those choices of perhaps they were more of an EDH, that was their formation of where cards need to come from, that play style, or maybe they were, a limited player, etc., right? I could see the styles in the card choices within their bulk. And the other rule is you can't order from any kind of trading card online organization. These had to be what you owned. So did you, and I'm going to turn this over to Christian here. Christian, what was your biggest challenge while doing this? What did you find, being the 8th curator?
Biggest challenge was I tried to go in as blind as I could, but also finding cards that just still filled in some needed gaps and added something to the cube.
So what was interesting about this is I didn't give them guidance. All I did was call audibles. I didn't want to gatekeep this cube. This is not Anthony's cube no more than this is Chris Moore's cube, right? This is a group project. So I'm just bulk entering. All I would say is we have a lot of gold cards. For example, Boros, we had about 17 entries. And I'm going to cut this guys down to 4 of the best. Please cease and desist entering any more or sending me images of Boros cards for the time being. We noticed that the Wraths started getting close to the 18-20 mark at some point because that's what people had a lot of in their bulk rares ideas. Like in my case, I entered in Fumigate in a previous episode we talked about. That would be the first one that I led off with. And then I saw this cascading effect of all these other 10 people just mass entering all kinds of board wipes, even if that was in red, like with an earthquake or the Ritual of Soot or whatever. It was just getting really out of control. So I had to say, hey, I'm going to be the bumpers at the proverbial bowling alley. I'm just saying we need to stop on the Wraths for now. We're freezing and locking Wraths. Please stop sending me Wraths. Yeah. And all I would do is say, hey, control's a little light. Blue is getting really dense and white is falling behind. And then they would come back on their second entries as fast as they could. First come, first serve, and try to get them entered. Now, that being said, I did ask Chris Moore and myself, who've been doing this the longest, to basically stand down, right? Let the others have a chance, because what we wanted to see is what their entries would look like, because this is an everyone's cube, right? It's a dumpster fire project, but it also needs to be a playable cube. It's not so much dumpster fire. The intentions of this cube is not to be the worst cards of bulk. I've had that kind of feedback from people. No, it was a laughable name, if I'm being honest. I want a very playable cube, but I don't want to power max it. I just want it to be fun and see what evolves. Christian, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah. So I got the signals of there was a lack of white cards and blue cards, black cards, and we needed some more control. And I got in kind of before the wraths were cut off, so I did contribute to the wrath problem. But I also tried to bring in some like counter spells and some other cards that were just good creatures that had a control-y aspect to them.
Which leads us over to the first thing, because we're going to get down. This is the Christian episode, and him being the 8th curator in this project. One of the interesting things that I learned this evening is that he went blind, and we've talked about this before. We love our Christian here at UberCube. He is our chaotic player, and what I'm kind of taking notes of is it's the behavioral aspect of choices. He told me, I did not look at this list. Whereas others looked at the cascading list as it grew and made their decisions, he just went with the audibles of we need control, but didn't gauge it off of the formation, which is beautiful and chaotic. And that's kind of what's happening here. Because as this cube has evolved, we've been drafting the heck out of it online. Let's just say that. And the decks that are coming out of it are amazing. And one thing that is important to note, it's helped so much. We have approximately 75 non-basic lands. They're intentionally slow. I'm telling you to think Guildgate level, right?
Yeah.
Or Tri-land level, or Bounce land level, or Thriving Land, or Snow land duels, etc. And it's intentional, because that was the only rule break we did. Because if we went with a mana base or lack thereof, this would be the proverbial dumpster fire. We want this to be playable. I mean, we're going to double sleeve this. We're going to crack it open and have a great time. Probably going to get a fancy case. But retail wise, this has currently 450 bulk rares and mythics with the type of lands that I spoke to just a moment ago. And we're currently at $186 US. Which is impressive. If you wanted to be a first-time curator, I just wanted it. And that, to be clear, that is from our binders. No one ordered these cards. It's just what you had from Draft Chaff, from Ravnica or Theros, or just lying around some Innistrad nonsense. Or maybe you were in 8th edition, right? And you wanted to run that. Or Legends, who knows? Because there's cards from all over the place in this cube, which makes it so beautiful. And that's just different people's idea of what bulk is, right? I mean, We talked about in my episode some of the cards I added, and they're not good, but they're fun. And they had an emotional connection to me as a player throughout my years, starting early 1997. And what I enjoyed about Magic, I put that in there, included with Signpost. Christian, do you have anything to add to that idea?
Yeah, and for me, I started much later than a lot of people playing Magic. I've only been playing for like 10 years, so the pool of cards that I have is not as expansive as some of the other players in the group. So it was also more of a challenge for me, because I was coming in late and then had smaller card pool set-wise to pick from as well.
All right, so before we get into discussing the choices that Christian made, let's go over the top-level idea of the project. Step 1, assign an admin. That's going to be the person that's going to be the bumper rails. They're not going to be dictating what people put in there. They're just going to be telling people, hey, you got too much of this, too little of that. Maybe we need to shore this up. But with little to no guidance, just to see what happens. That's what makes this fun. Step 2, each curator submits 45 cards. Is a good starting point. If you have a group of 8, assuming you have 3 packs of 15, that's the ideal situation. We did have some deviation in that, obviously. Step 3, using Cube Cobra, and I included this in the show notes to the previous episode, and I will include it in this one as well, how to do tag assignments by name of the cards. That way you can represent the curators, and you can see, and it makes it so you can filter it, which we're going to be doing tonight. And we can say, these are Christian's editions because I've got it all tagged and filtered in Cube Cobra, which you can assign up to 10 colors. So it just happened to work out. Step 5 is start tuning the cube. Chris Moore and I, the other night over a phone call, logged in and talked out cards, we being the veteran curators, and started doing some cuts. It was kind of the policing section of this cube design where we saw some either extreme power outliers or they exceeded the threshold of cost because this needs to be accessible to all the cube community, right? And then the third one was it was a huge power outlier or it was just completely a non-functional card for whatever reason. Or another one is directly relegated to a sideboard, which we'll talk about here shortly. We're going to go over and move into the next section. To kind of lay out the individuals, Christian, would you mind kind of calling out the order by first name? And we'll talk about color assignments will be to these people, but it's just for recognition to make this more tangible while you're listening, so we can say who was first and to the 10th.
Okay, and as previously mentioned, Anthony was the first person to enter in, and he is noted as red in there. Chris was the second in pink. David was third, green.
That's because Mr. Black was on another job.
Oh, brother. Okay. Anyways, continuing on. Abram was the fourth. He got blue. Greg was brown. Jason was sixth and got turquoise. Stu was orange and was in their seventh. I was eighth, got the purple. Nathan came in at ninth and now is yellow. And Josh is 10th and is violet.
That was a little Reservoir Dogs, my personal favorite, Quentin Tarantino. Shout out to JP. We were talking about his top fives. Reservoir Dogs is S tier. Just saying.
To be honest, I've seen that movie exactly once, and that was in high school. So I did not get that reference there. Sorry, my dude.
Yeah, that is the best reference from the movie. He's like, well, I got to be Mr. Pink because Mr. Black's on another job. Shut up, move on. All right. So we're going to kind of move over to the choices that Christian, and I'm going to challenge him to say the whys. Like he did mention he went in this blind, and I get it, but he had reasons and logic. He did just not haphazardly pull this out of his binder. He is a curator presently of 2 cubes, but I will say that he's the Padawan of the group. He is learning the curation just because he's been doing it a shorter time, right? So his skill set is evolving. Do you have anything to add to that before we dive in?
Yeah, everything that you said, that's correct. And yeah, I have still picking up my chops on cube curating and always looking to learn more. And this experience has been nice for it.
Well, let's dive over to your first choice. And we're going to cover 3 cards from white, and then we'll do the same. We'll bounce back and forth, talking about the subsets. And I'm going to challenge Christian to tell us the whys and what was his logic behind doing so.
Okay. First card, he said the little guidance I got was white and blue and black were kind of short. So for white, I chose Giselle Goldmane, which is a 4/4 for 2 colorless and 2 white. And it has first strike, so automatically right there, it's a fairly good mid-range card.
It had nothing to do with the fact that it is, in fact, a cat warrior in your decision-making, question mark?
I mean, not going to lie, I love cats, and one day I'm going to get back to working on my cat cube. And yeah, that may have a little bit, but still, it's just a really good card, because the rest of the text on there is basically it gives an overrun effect for the mid to late game, and that costs 3 generic, 2 white, and attacking creatures you control get +X till the end of the turn, where X is the number of attacking creatures you control.
Yeah, what is so interesting about this is 1, it may be a power outlier. We'll find out soon enough. 2, it doesn't require a go wide strategy, which is so interesting. It can do this to itself. It can just be a 5/5 on rate attacking, and it has first strike, so that's powerful. I know that's a mana sink, but in this type of environment, where our mana is a little slower, if not a lot slower, right? Yeah. Our games are going to go longer. That's to be expected. It's going to be very almost retail limited type play. Yeah. It's going to be a toned down match, and there may be some juggernauts that turn games. We have kind of course corrected that sense through other curators that we will talk to shortly. But this case, this is a juggernaut that can do a go wide strategy, go tall strategy. I love this edition. I thought this was a great choice. I think it might be a power outlier. We're going to find out soon enough. But any thoughts about that before we move on to the next card?
Yeah, I mean, it is very powerful, but having that mana sink in there is just really going to help out with giving you something to do with your mana late game.
And in truth, as the cube evolved through other curations, adding using that cascading method of entry that we talked about, they did shore up the aggro suite. So this is a great top end for pushing those 2 1s for ones over the finish line late game. I love this decision. I thought it was fantastic. I'm going to ask Christian about this next one. This is a very powerful, but I would say it's going to be strong in this environment. It may be toned back. I'm going to offer that. I won't lead into it too much more because the environment will be slower, but I think this is a great choice. We're going to have to see how this one performs as well, too.
Yeah, the next one is Sun Scorched Regent, and it is a 4/3 flying dragon for 3 colors and 2 white. And whenever an opponent casts a spell, you put a 1/1 counter on Sun Scorched Regent and gain 1 life. Just want to have a little bit of life gain in there, pumping it up, making it bigger. Also is all very good.
And interestingly enough, some of the other curators had done additional life gain in the cube too. But we did, in our sweep that we did, a lot of that got cut back just because it was a very niche. This card is standalone in what it required, but other curators that we'll talk to in the future, I think they were picking up on some of these signposts and digging into it heavy. And I didn't, like I said, I didn't give them bias. We just did think of they were building the foundation and Chris Moore and I were doing the finish work or first round of finish work so we could box this off to 450. So I saw some of them maybe taking this as a signpost, and then they put another creature that said, if you gain life this turn, not standalone, if you gain life this turn, then do a thing. Yeah. But otherwise it did nothing. And that's going to be something we talk about with the other curators as this project evolves and we have these additional episodes. Because I think everybody has a learning that what I like that Christian chose this one is the effect doesn't require anything else to do the effect. It's just an added benefit, right?
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, in this environment, in truth, and we talked about this previously, it is a 4/3 flyer on rate. Very worst case scenario. That is sometimes in a slower environment strong enough. Everything else is icing on a cake. The next one is I called out to the team. Again, I'm doing the bumper lanes, but I'm doing small, subtle audibles. Control is lacking. I can see it because I'm looking 40,000 feet as, again, the amplitude is rising on the equalizers as these, the cubes getting submitted. I see things happening. Hey, we are lacking in removal of some sorts and or control. Christian, would you mind talking about your next decision here, please?
Yeah, so this is Captured by the Consul, which is an enchantment aura, and it costs 3 generic and a white. And it says, enchant creature you don't control. Enchanted creature can't attack. Whenever an opponent casts a spell, if it has a single target, change that target to the enchanted creature. And this is what I thought. A lot of times in sets, all the control aspects, a lot of it gets relegated to common and uncommon, just so you can have a playable game. So finding the rare control pieces was a little bit harder.
Which leads us over to the next thing. This was me calling audibles again, but this one I didn't call. And it's interesting. One of the things I saw, and we're going to talk about this a lot more, is as the additional curators entered in, I started seeing the emergence of quote-unquote archetypes or lines of play. And some of these individuals, as Christian has admitted, didn't look at the other people's homework. What's so neat about this project, and that you two at home can replicate, is this doesn't have to be a hot mess. Some of these, at the bulk and the mythic, even though some of these cards, and we call them bulk rares, or this is the dumpster fire project, most of these do something. And granted, I'm guilty of putting a few cards in there because I just love them very much, right? But these cards at this rarity level do something. And so they may flesh out their own archetypes with little to no effort on design. I'm starting to see it, which leads over to this next one that I'm going to talk about. And Christian added this one. It's Body Double. This card is very strong in this environment because there are discard outlets, and maybe others didn't look at it. I'm looking at this from a 40,000 feet, seeing the pieces fall in. And when Body Double came out and he added this, I'm like thinking to myself, sweet. I didn't tell him, right? Others did it too, but I'm like, oh, okay, finally, somebody saw it. And for 4 colorless and 1 blue, you get a creature shapeshifter, 0/0. You may have Body Double enter the battlefield as a copy of a creature in a graveyard, so it's either you or the opponent. This card creates an interesting dynamic so that we're not just topside on our choices. I love this type of card in this environment. This wouldn't traditionally fit into your most powerful vintage environments. And that's what makes me so happy about these choices. And I just want to say thank you for adding this, because once I did this, other people, even though you were 8th, I can tell you that the 9th and 10th started seeing this, and they started, like, not Reanimator, but interactions with graveyards adds a different dynamic to this cube that wasn't necessarily there before. This next card that he added is another one. I've been doing pack one, pick ones on our Facebook drafting page, and I've thrown them up on Twitter. And this one gets picked out quite regularly too, is Give Me That, right? And normally when I start talking about this card, it wouldn't be something that you would lean into. But I want to emphasize this is going to be a slower environment. You're looking at turn 7, 8, 9, I guess on average, maybe longer, but I think we're somewhere around that mid-range of a game, right? These aren't going to be fast and furious games, but these will be intricate games that are going to be very chess in their maneuvering, as in players get to make decisions based on interactions that are toned down. This is good for the new curators on both ends of the spectrum. Not only are they adding to this cube, but they get to see lines of plays that are a little bit more tempoed back. It's going to enhance the decision making and hopefully bring in new curators into the fold, right? I know we've got Jason Brinkley has been on the phone with me today, and he's hype about his cube designs and his projects, and he was on the fence, and others have been talking to me like, I'm building a cube now because this project excited them so much. Even Stu, who's been on the fence talking about his cubes, is like, I'm in love with this project because everybody gets a say here. There's no, we made jokes. It's not a dictatorship. I'm just saying, give me your bulks. I'm going to enter them up. We're going to start shaping this into something. Yes, I will cut some chaff. I worked with Chris Moore. We do have to make some executive decisions, but it is what it is. This next card, though, it's powerful. Spell Swindle. For 3 colorless and 2 blue, you get an instant. Counter target spell. Create X colorless treasure tokens, where X is that spell's converted mana cost. They have tap, sacrifice its artifact, add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool. This is so powerful because some of these creatures are going to be top heavy. And we have, as the curation happened, I fully expected in this experiment that we're just going to have a bunch of mana values of 6, 7, and 8. And that's not actually what happened. We have this nice, there is a curve formed. And through drafting, we have seen it's been pleasant to see that. When this card was first, we were like on you were number 8 is when this came out. It was still kind of not curved out, if you will. So this card was definitely on the cusp of a powerful take because people knew they wanted those treasures. They wanted to set you back tempo-wise so that they could drive forward with their huge 9 dumpy nonsense or their Terastodon or whatever. This is how they would get there. Yeah. What was your logic behind adding this?
I like to call this card Mana Drain at Home for the format. And if you're going with $2 and under, that's what you can get there. And knowing that the mana base is not going to be that great, it also allows you to kind of fix your mana. You're not count on that all the times because you may need to counter one of those lower mana value threats, but still, extra mana, always great, and especially when the mana rocks are so hard to find.
I like the tension. He kind of just said that maybe in so many words. I like the tension that this type of card creates because it costs you 5, right? And you're hoping to capture someone when they're dropping their bomb, right? 9 mana Terastodon, and you go, nay, right? But sometimes you're going to get a lesser mana value because it's a critical game piece. So it creates this tension while it's in your hand. That's what I like about this card in particular. It has that, like you said, the mana drain feel to it. The tension, and mana drain kind of causes this problem too. Do you go for the gusto and try to get that big fatty so you get the most, or you just play it as a very hyper efficient counterspell, right? And that depends on what type of player you are. This emulates that decision making that a player, the drafter, has to make. I'm in love with this card, and I think it fits very well. Good choice on your part. The next one he put in here, and this is whenever I said, hey, this is board wipe-ish, and I chose not to tone this one back because there's a certain amount of control elements that must exist. This will be our last one in the group. It's Distorting Wake. And for 3 colorless and X, you get a sorcery. Return X target non-land permanents to their owner's hand. And the reason why this needed to happen is because we do have a deficiency. I didn't say that till later in the project because, again, I didn't want to give people bias or biases. Yeah. I wanted them to make their own decisions. But enchantments and artifacts, those do exist in their environment, had little to no interaction. And this card gave you a way as a control player to, again, put it back in their hand, tempo them back, and maybe deal with a few problematic enchantments and a few minor planeswalkers because it gets non-land permanents. Yeah. So another good choice on your part. I'm impressed by that. You have anything to add to that?
Another reason I really like this one is just the scalability here. If mid-game you just need to get rid of one thing, that's great. And then, but you can, if in late game, you can just shift the tides there.
Yep. All right, so we're going to move over to black, and we're going to cover probably 2 of these that I thought was just interesting choices. Maybe 3, we'll see, but this is meant to be kind of a consolidated Christian. What was your mindset behind these choices? I want to talk about this particular card that you have. I have queued up here right now for you.
Okay, this is Piper of the Swarm. It is a human warlock that's a 1/3 for 1 colorless and 1 black. And it has rats you control have menace. And then for 1 generic and 1 black, you can tap it and create a 1/1 black rat creature token. And for 2 colorless and 2 black, you can tap it and sacrifice 3 rats and gain control of target creature.
And the flavor text is dope. If it has ears, it will dance to my tune. Anyways, I thought this was a good choice. This is a mana sink. That's how I see it. This is a mana sink that creates defensive bodies. It helps you with the go wide strategies. Ties into your original choice ever so well with your Giselle Goldmane. And you start making these rats, and you got rats and cats, and dogs and cats falling from the ceiling, the end of the world, right?
Yeah.
It's just kind of funny because you can kind of use something like this with your excess mana, because I feel as this cube evolves, there will in fact be excess mana, and you have to push some of these good go wide strategies to have a home here. There's not a lot of token presence that did evolve out of this. This is one of the few cards that I admired because, again, I'm sitting here getting all these text messages, just blankets, right, of the different curators, and I'm smiling. I'm like, yes, this card's awesome. I'm so glad somebody, because they're just pulling it out of their binders. I'm like, yeah, we got a mana sink, sweet. The next one I'll cover, it kind of ties into what he just did here, and it's Drana, Liberator of Malakir. And I'm not going to read all the text, but the gist is when she deals combat damage, you put a 1/1 counter on each attacking creature you control. So it really builds off of the synergies of what you've done. And I got to ask you, was it intentional?
Yes. No. Yeah, I mean, this is a good card, and if you have a bunch of token generators, and I tried to add some of that in here, just being able to buff up that team and, make it from just, a 1/1 to a 2/2 to 2/2 menace, you're starting to get into putting on some pressure there.
Yeah, which leads me to the next card, because he said he did this blind, folks, but he did fill in some missing components. It's so interesting. We brought in we hired him as a contractor, so we wanted to build a house. He didn't ask what the house is supposed to look like, and he built a house anyways, and I guess we'll live there. Liliana's Reaver for 2 colorless and 2 black. He's got a 4/3 zombie. Death Touch. When Liliana's Reaver deals combat damage to a player, that player discards a card, and you put a 2/2 black zombie token onto the battlefield tap. This emulates Grave Titan. This is baby Grave Titan.
Yep.
And Grave Titan would have been way too powerful because, again, I want to reiterate, we've had some people that have been watching this cube and interacting with it, and they're like, this card's not terrible. Why isn't it your dumpster fire cube? I did that in jest. I do want cards that are fun to play. This card is a favorite of mine personally. It has entered and left my horror cube on numerous occasions, and it does a control mechanism that I did not emphasize to the group, and there's very little it does this, is the word discards a card. I didn't want it to become, these games are not intended to be miserable hand stripping games, but a little bit is healthy. Sometimes, and it may be in their benefit because they get to choose, but still, card advantage is card advantage. Your hand size matters, I guess. So it does do a lot here, and that Death Touch is real. And it so interestingly correlates into that Piper the Swarm, Drana Liberator type of idea he did. When I was getting his additions, and matter of fact, he did it with Mardu Strike Looter too, which also makes a token. I really am grateful that he added in some kind of black go-wide strategy with tokens, because I didn't see that through the cascades of images and stuff I was receiving from the other curators. Good job on your part, man.
Yeah, thank you. And like I said, just having that mid-range stuff for black, I thought was going to be really important because, everybody's going to throw in huge mana-intensive creatures, and you really want to have that mana curve, like you said.
There's another card that he's added to this as we start kind of wrapping up, because, as I said, he originally added much more than 26 cards. We have cut a few, and we're going to talk about those very shortly. But here is his true power outlier, and this one doesn't really need any kind of introduction, it's going to be Hellrider. And when it attacks, creature you control attacks, Hellrider does 1 damage to defending player for each attacking creature. It goes with that go wide strategy, so I have to think, and I have to hope to think, that his choices were very in tune. He's got multiple cards that say, I like tokens, I like attacking. It pressed that aggro package. This is probably very, very powerful, extremely powerful, but I think it may be necessary at this current state of the cube. Because we have, Chris Moore and I've done level 1 sweeping. I've done some minor level 2 sweeping. Just some polishing, right? That's all we're doing is a little bit of finish work.
Right.
But all this is just their curation. The next card, and this is kind of an homage to Stu, and I got to talk about this one. We're going to talk about one green card. This is a very Stu-centric type card. Steel Leaf Companion. For 3 green pips, you get a 5/4 Elf Knight. Steel Leaf Companion can't be blocked by creatures with power 2 or less. It is the antithesis to the other strategies he's put in here. I find that interesting. The other thing, too, certain colors in this cube, as I have observed, can handle, and this is against a lot of people's philosophies, can handle more pips. Green specifically. I've watched it. There's not ramp in here per se. It's just the mana is a little bit more graduated towards green, might be able to get away with some multi-pip strategies like you've got Terastodon in here. Whereas, and I didn't tell the other curators, that brings an interesting point. I didn't set guidepost or lines saying, hey, watch your pips, guys. You've got too many black pips. You've got too many blue pips. I didn't do any of that. What I did do is just enter them. When it came to the finessing that Chris and I are going to do, being the ones that have been doing this the longest, we may make some of these cuts. I chose not to cut this card. It's value add for green. It gives green a nice, strong, potentially early mid-range play, and I'm okay with emphasizing a few monocolored decks in here. I don't want them all have to be forced 2 colors. Because once you've decided, if you chose to do Boros, you got to realize you're going to be dealing with, in this cube, a guild gate, right? You're not going to get this fast mana. You're not getting any kind of, there's no fetches or shocks in here. And at one point, Stu had mentioned on Twitter, hey, can we get some shocks in here? And no, absolutely not. That's not what we're trying to do with this cube. This is intended to be affordable, accessible, and for all types of players, and to grow new curators for the community. Do you have anything to add to that, Christian?
Yeah, and this card, it just really, like you said, is a great, I mean, for 3 mana to get 5/4, it's just that's a lot of power for 3 mana. It's very pip intensive, but then that will then make interesting decisions when you're drafting. Like, do I want to go heavily into green? If so, yeah, this is a house.
So let's talk about the final 2 on his additions that made where we're at in the cuts now. And one of the things that I did signal to the group was we are lacking any form of mana rocks. And we don't want to accelerate too much because they're at a premium in this cube. I can tell you that now.
Yeah.
We have added in a coalition relic, stuff like that, and they may prove too good. Or they'll prove premium picks. There's no soul ring in here, but that's a super powerful card that may net some advantage because there was a printing that happened to fit both in the price point and obviously it's rare.
Right.
But this one card, before we got to that, Christian chose, and I like it. It's a little late game-ish, but that's okay. Seal of the Guild Pact. For 5 colors, you get an artifact. As Seal of the Guild Pact enters the battlefield, choose 2 colors. Each spell you cast costs 1 less to cast for each of those chosen colors it is. What's interesting about this is Stu did a draft today. He did a mono blue deck, and he splashed 1 black, so we'll call it mono blue, quote-unquote, just baby Dimir. And he ran Seal the Guild Pact because it increased the efficiency of his control deck because his finishers were higher end. So even in a monocolor, this is value add.
Yep.
I saw him that, and even with a splash. So I was a little uncertain about this card, but after seeing his deck, it was really strong for this environment. I can see that this card may be highly beneficial in what we kind of needed for those top-end control mechanisms. Although most players would look at this and go, that card's terrible. And here, I'm going to say it's pretty decent. It's on rate and it kind of does what you need it to do. Kind of reduce some of those pips for some of your gold cards that we have that are a little mana intensive that we'll talk about in a later episode. Do you have anything else you want to add to that?
Yeah, and like we had mentioned before, mana rocks, those are always in much lower rarities generally. And like and the better ones are always out of the price range. So just finding something that would be able to still serve that purpose of a mana rock and doing that. This is a card that I've had in my collection forever, and I was like, oh, great. A spot I can finally put it in that will actually be useful.
So now we're going to kind of move over to some of the cuts. And it was an opportunity for us as a group in a very positive affirmation type of way to explain the logic behind our cuts. Because one thing Chris Moore and I talked about was the concern, maybe someone would get upset that we cut their card choice, right? Or maybe they would become defensive. And I'm assuming that could happen in certain groups if you started showing too much bias to your decision making. But we were just doing it based on non-biased as best we could. A lot of mine got cut, just to be honest with you, because as the first person going in, frankly, some of the decisions made by the later curators were just better cards. Even though they were bad cards, they were better bad cards.
Right.
And mine just had to go. I mean, it was just gravitational shift being one of them, et cetera. Just like, it's got to go. All right, so one of the cards that initially, when we're doing our sweeps, Chris Moore and I quickly identified, I put out a beckon. We need a solution for enchantments. And I understand why the decision was made, but I'm going to explain why this one didn't cut the mustard, if you will. And I have since talked to Christian on this decision because he was trying to fill a slot and it met the requirements, and that card is deicide. For one colorless and one plains, you get an instant. Exile target enchantment. If the exiled card is a god card, search its controller's library, graveyard, hand for any of those repeated names, get rid of it, shuffle it, blah, blah, blah. It's a very constructed type of card. All that's flavor text, except for the word exile target enchantment, which does apply. However, as we explained, that's not the solution we were looking for. Yes, it's instant speed. Yes, it's under $2. But it's immediately relegated to sideboard type of card.
Yep.
And we have discussed that because as new curators, and Christian being a newer curator, I understand where his space was at. Hey, they're looking for a solution. I got one right here. But one of the interesting things we pointed out is, and Chris Moore and I were talking on the phone, we're like, why is this not in his Bant enchantment cube? Why? Because all the other flavor text, all that, if it's exiled, it kills gods, first off, and it has no use. That is very powerful. Even if there's no getting it out of their library, it's singleton, but this card 100% needs to go in your Bant enchantment cube, but does not have a home here because it's too narrow.
Yeah, and again, we've said it before on the cusp of sounding like a broken record. It's just a lot of that removal is relegated to common and uncommon.
The next card that we cut, and in retrospect, after having this discussion and saying all the things I've said out loud, it may be a future consideration for the go wide strategies, but Wraths were getting way too powerful. It was Martial Coup. And basically, Martial Coup is a sorcery. It's a Wrath with X in it, and you put X 1/1 white soldier creature tokens into play. And if X is 5 or more, destroy all other creatures. But he came in during the time as we'll refer to as the Great Flood of Wraths, right? And I had to say, I'll enter it in, and because I wanted to see the perspective. But versus the other Wraths, the fact that it was scalable, sure, that's great, but it was kind of pseudo-conditional and one that you would hold in your hand. I wanted one that was a flat rate. I didn't want all these X spells that were super hyper-scalable. I just had to make a decision. It didn't play into what we were looking for at the time. Again, I want to stress, these cards that we've cut, they're going into the quote-unquote cube sideboard, the maybe board, right? Just because we cut them doesn't mean they're gone forever. This was just the first stroke of getting some cuts out of the way. Do you have any thoughts on that?
A counterpoint to that one would be that could be considered more just a token generator and a wrath if needed, and adding to that go wide strategy. So it's more in there because it has the ability to not only generate tokens, but also wipe them.
Yeah, another card that he added, and there's nothing wrong with this card, perfectly serviceable. Again, it was that big request that I put out there that we have a problem, and it wasn't so much in the artifact realm, but it was going to be the potential for enchantment specifically to be devastating to a game or static to a game and unanswerable. And then secondly, there were, as I watched the equalizers start to migrate on the soundboard, right? People doing entries, artifacts were becoming prevalent too, because there was a power creep very much so happening by level 3 of the entries. By level 8, we're getting I'm putting in nonsense and people are putting in some high stakes Sun Titan type cards. I think you're being one of the Sun Titan conversation, which is not as powerful in this cube. And we did allow it. We're going to test it, but I want to talk about artifact mutation. And for 1 red and 1 green, you get an instant. destroy target artifact. It can't be regenerated. Create X/1/1 green Saproling tokens, where X is the artifact's converted mana cost. It's a good card. Gold slots, I decided to make them more signposty. This was very utilitarian gold slot that could be done by another card, but it does play into, if you notice, he's got borderline very much a token-minded package. That also, as we talk about these cards, and I'll share with the group his additions, you'll see a very go wide thinking as he's pulling from his binders. Other people didn't necessarily do that. It was a very stack high type of great to see what has emerged from the different curators as we move through. And we talked this one out. This was another one of those corner case. They have to have one of the few actual, this isn't a powered vintage cube where you want to get a high stakes artifact out of the way. This is a way late game. Maybe it's a monstrosity you have to deal with, like a steel hellkite. By the way, on the watch list, I get it. This kills it, but other cards kill it too. And they kill other things too. This was only very narrow. Again, going sideboard and then taking a critical slot was something as me being the 40,000 foot bumper rails at the bowling alley had to make some executive decisions, both myself and Chris Moore, and just said, this is too narrow, great, but narrow at 4 gold slots per.
Yeah. And I knew at the late game with all my gold selections that they may just not cut the mustard. It goes along with everything that I've submitted. I'll throw it in there, see what happens.
All right, so we're kind of moving to a summary here of Christian's amazing additions. And if I had to go again as the top level admin of this cube experiment, which has been wonderful, by the way, and it's currently in the phase where we're going to do some group communications on final cuts and additions, and it has to be from your curation that you have, or your collection you have at home, and or it has to meet the price requirements, because the project is intended to be accessible, an entry point for all people that have binders of chaff just lying around. The Dumpster Fire project is supposed to be an everybody project and supposed to be a fun, serviceable cube that, in my mind, I would love to go the way of, say, the Fey Cube, which is a beautifully crafted cube designed by May. And it's just kind of leans more into Magic doesn't have to be this high-powered, ultra-strong, high-tier, high-paced Magic. Sometimes you can actually have, hey, I want to bust out the Dumpster Fire Cube. I want to play a different type of Magic. It gives variety to the gameplay and what people get to decide. And this has been a really great project. As the 8th curator, would you like to offer any things that you may have learned as this project has progressed?
Yeah, if you want an easier time and greater selection of cards to choose from when you're doing this, get in early.
or take advantage of the fact that you're number 8 of 10 and look at the cube as it's formed and make critical decisions. Luckily for us, he had some ideas of what things he liked, and they just so happened, luckily, I gotta say this is the luckiest cat in the world. He's like, tokens, people like tokens, I'm gonna do tokens. And you know what, whatever, it made the cube better. I don't recommend we talked about this, it's funny, he brings a good point. One of the things Stu and I talked about in the first episode, which I do highly recommend you listen to it, we set the foundational pieces of the idea, and is to just bring in 45 cards and just go, here's my cards, guys. That sounds all good and well, but I think you could do that, but then you got to deal with this mess of entry. This way of doing it, of virtually establishing like one person being admin, and doesn't have to be like your best, but maybe I probably would recommend a person that's curated before, ask them to take off their curator hat for a minute and just be entry point and do the tags and assignments. Yes. And then just kind of think like you're the coach, not the quarterback. You're on the sidelines. You're calling to the quarterback.
Yeah. And
then let the team kind of just do what the team's going to do, right? Yeah. All you're doing is giving some strategic calls to the play line, right? And I think that this technique, this way of doing it has been interesting and amazing.
Yeah.
Well, that's pretty much going to be a wrap for this episode. This is intended just to be kind of a part 2 in an episode or a series of episodes that we're going to do talking about the evolution and growth and what people have learned as they've done their entries. We've got big plans for this idea. We just think that this is a huge opportunity for listeners and those new cube curators to build this cube with little to no cost added. It's playing from your chaff.
Yeah.
Some people's chaff is going to be greater than others because they've been playing longer. That's okay. But the ones that have been playing shorter are going to have the more powerful cards, right? Because you can see the interesting evolution as I'm putting in cards from 96, 97, 98, 4th edition, 5th edition, etc., some Exodus, whatever. And then everybody else is coming here going like, yeah, man, we've got some really great Modern Horizons nonsense. It's not the same Magic, but it's interesting. It's okay. Then you have to, I recommend having someone or multiple people kind of do the sweeps, because we did talk about the concept of, and it's not going to work, making it a fully democratic process. It would take forever. In my personal opinion, it wouldn't have been fun doing polls. Maybe a few of them for the last cards might have been interesting, or a few additions. But I think at the end of the day, Chris Moore and I made the decision, 10 people sitting at a table talking about this. It'd be like Parliament. We'd all be screaming. It'd be House of Commons yelling to the top of their lungs. And there's a point where maybe too many cases be made. And I think that the better way is just to have the veteran curators do the squaring off of the rough work that the new curators do, and talk about it if someone really wants to see a card included. And Chris Moore and I talked about this even during our cuts, because I came across a few of his cards and he came across a few of mine. I gave my reasons. And it was more of like, I just really want to see this. It's not so much that it fits anything. It just brings me joy. And he did that with like 3 of his. And we kind of tried to look at it through a lens of it maybe some of your choices brought you joy, and we left them in there like cats. I saw the cats. I saw the elves. I picked up on that because I know you, as a curator and as a player, just loves those. So I'm not going to cut those. Other than that, this has been a fun and interesting just kind of episode 2 of a series. We're going to progress further with this idea, but we're going to move over to our socials. And I want to, actually, before I even do that, I want to thank Christian again for joining us. Do you have any final thoughts?
I would say if you have a play group and you have a bunch of draft, dive right into this. This has been an absolute blast of a project. It's fun seeing everybody's submissions and just seeing something tangible from everybody's inputs. It's been great.
And the best part is he's seen all the submissions tonight because he looked at it for the first time. All right. So if you love the show, we would truly, truly appreciate a 5-star review on your favorite player. If you want to support the show, please use our Inked Gaming affiliate link where you can get all your playmats, your dice bags, your mouse pads, etc. It's a great way to support the show, but also getting all those pieces and parts you need to have a true cube experience. Those cube essentials that we talked about in a previous episode. Playmats are pretty critical for protecting your cards, and that's coming up in a future episode on Monday that we're going to talk about that stuff. But I love this company. I highly recommend you check them out. If you use our link to make your purchases, it keeps the lights on here at UberCube and helps us to keep moving this idea forward. Other than that, you can find us at Twitter at UberCubeMTGPod, or you can reach us at UberCubeMTGPodcast@gmail.com, or you can link us on Discord, hashtag UberCube. And we have a Patreon landing site, UberCube, that you can check out. And we've got some really, really huge news coming out soon. It's going to be exciting for the community.
Very exciting.
I'm hype about what's happening next. We're going to keep that in our pocket for now. You may see some Twitters coming up here very soon, but it's awesome. I am so hyped. But we're going to hold that. We're going to hold that. We got to hold back that excitement. Other than that, we're going to say the thing that we always say here at UberCube is happy cubing.